What do you think is a 5% raise after 6 years of absolute loyalty, asking for too much? When I sat in my boss office and asked for my very first raise, he simply laughed in my face and told me to try somewhere else. So I picked up my phone and made a single call. The voice on the other end said they always had a position ready for me. By the time my boss realized what I had actually done, all that remained on my desk was a simple resignation letter. He had absolutely no idea what was coming next. My name is Sienna, and I am 33 years old. I spent the last 6 years working as the lead data architect at Caldwell Logistics, which is the nationwide transportation company owned and operated by my own family. Before I continue this story and tell you exactly how I brought their entire empire to its knees, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit the like button and subscribe if you have ever had to deal with a toxic workplace that completely undervalued your true worth and refused to see your contributions. The air in my father's office always smelled heavily of expensive leather and arrogant entitlement. His name is Richard Caldwell, and at 62 years old, he ran Caldwell Logistics like a feudal king presiding over a kingdom he believed was his divine right. The room was massive with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the bustling Seattle harbor. Behind his enormous mahogany desk sat my father wearing a custom-tailored suit that cost more than my monthly salary. Lounging on the leather sofa to my right was my older brother Trent. At 36 years old, Trent held the title of Vice President of Sales. He was the undeniable golden boy of the family, the heir apparent who wore expensive watches and constantly checked his reflection in the office windows. I sat perfectly straight in the uncomfortable visitor chair, balancing my laptop on my knees. I had requested this meeting 3 weeks ago, and they had rescheduled on me 4 different times before finally granting me 15 minutes of their precious morning. I projected my presentation onto the large screen on the wall. The slide displayed a clear, undeniable graph showing a sharp upward trend in company profits and a massive drop in operational waste. As you can see from the quarterly reports, I began keeping my voice professional and steady. The proprietary routing algorithm I implemented last year has completely optimized our fleet dispatch schedules. By recalculating the most efficient delivery paths in real time and automatically adjusting for fuel consumption and traffic delays, the system has successfully saved Caldwell Logistics $4,200,000 over the past 12 months. My father barely glanced at the screen. He was busy polishing his golf clubs with a microfiber cloth. Trent let out a loud, exaggerated yawn and stretched his legs across the expensive sofa. "That is a nice little spreadsheet," Sienna Trent said, waving his hand dismissively. "But punching numbers into a computer does not exactly bring in the real revenue. I just closed a massive distribution contract with the Horizon Supermarkets chain yesterday. That was done through actual relationship building. Golf course networking and expensive dinners seal the deals, not your little science fair projects." I tightened my grip on my laptop. Trent had taken the credit for the Horizon contract, but the only reason they agreed to sign with us was because I had spent 3 sleepless weeks customizing a data integration model that proved our supply chain could handle their volume. He had literally handed them a binder full of my data architecture to close the deal. "The data integration model is what secured Horizon," I reminded him calmly. "The algorithm is the backbone of our current profit margin." Because of this documented success and my 6 years of service without a single compensation review, I am officially requesting a modest 5% raise to my base salary. It is a standard market adjustment for a lead data architect with my proven track record. The room went completely silent for a fraction of a second before my father and my brother erupted into genuine, uncontrollable laughter. The sound echoed off the wood-paneled walls, grating against my ears. Trent laughed so hard he had to wipe a tear from his eye. My father chuckled, shaking his head, setting down his club. "A 5% raise," my father repeated, as if I had just asked him to hand over the keys to the entire company. "Sienna, you are typing on a keyboard in a back office. You are not out on the front lines risking your neck or shaking hands with corporate buyers. You do not generate the revenue. Your brother generates the revenue. I save the company millions. I countered, maintaining my composure despite the familiar sting of their blatant disrespect. The system I built is the only reason our profit margins are up. My father sighed, putting on his best condescending expression. The company is currently tightening its belt. We have major expansions planned, and Trent needs a larger expense account to wine and dine our new corporate clients. If you think a tiny 5% raise is more important than family loyalty and the future of our business, then maybe you do not belong in management. If you are that unhappy with your generous salary, you can always try somewhere else. Trent smirked, leaning back with his hands behind his head. Yeah. Go see if anyone else wants to pay you to make colorful pie charts all day. Good luck finding a better deal than working for family. I looked at my father and my older brother. I did not yell or cry. I simply closed my laptop, keeping my expression entirely blank. Understood, I said calmly before walking out the door. The heavy oak door clicked shut behind me, sealing away the sound of their self-satisfaction. The hallway outside the executive suites was lined with framed photographs of company milestones. I walked past the gallery of oversized egos and headed back toward my department. My workspace was a stark contrast to the executive floor. It was a functional glass-walled office filled with dual monitors, stacked whiteboards, and the constant hum of cooling fans. This was the real engine of Caldwell Logistics. Before I could even reach my desk, the sharp, rhythmic click of designer heels echoed down the corridor. I did not need to turn around to know who it was. The heavy scent of an exclusive Tom Ford perfume arrived a second before she did. Sienna, honey, you are walking entirely too fast for someone wearing such sensible shoes, a voice called out. I turned to see my sister-in-law, Jasmine Caldwell, gliding toward me. Jasmine was a highly successful luxury real estate broker, and she made sure everyone knew it. A striking African-American woman with flawless skin and a razor-sharp bob, she looked like she had just stepped off the cover of a high-fashion magazine. Today, she was wearing a tailored white crepe suit that probably cost more than the server rack I was about to reboot. Draped over her forearm in a deliberate display of casual wealth was a brand new limited edition Prada handbag. "Hello, Jasmine," I said, keeping my tone perfectly neutral. "What brings you to the office today?" "Oh, I was just in the neighborhood closing a penthouse on the waterfront," she said, examining her immaculate manicure. "Trent told me he secured the Horizon deal, so we are celebrating. I came to drag him away from his desk." She looked me up and down, her gaze lingering critically on my dark gray slacks and plain navy blouse. Her lips pursed in a look of profound pity. "You know, Sienna, I admire your dedication to the grind." "I really do." Jasmine continued, her tone dripping with passive-aggressive concern. "But you are a director at a major logistics firm. You represent the family brand. Wearing polyester blends and flat shoes makes you look like an entry-level intern. We simply cannot have people thinking Caldwell Logistics does not pay its management well." She adjusted her Prada bag, making sure the logo caught the fluorescent lighting. "If you ever want to upgrade your aesthetic, I would be more than happy to book you a consultation with my personal stylist, Jasmine," offered brightly. "She works miracles with women who have neglected themselves. We could do a whole makeover day. My treat, of course. I know things are probably tight for you." I looked at Jasmine and felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no embarrassment, no urge to defend myself. She was a woman who measured her entire self-worth in square footage and Italian leather. She had absolutely no idea that the plain woman standing in front of her possessed a net worth that could buy her real estate brokerage twice over. Jasmine was entirely unaware that the software routing millions of dollars into her husband's bank account was not owned by the company. It was legally registered to an anonymous tech corporation that I controlled. I did not need to wear Prada because I owned the intellectual property that paid for it. The Caldwell routing system, which managed every single truck warehouse and delivery route nationwide, was exclusively my creation. I wrote the code during my graduate studies long before I ever signed an employment contract with my father. I possessed the master key to the entire Caldwell kingdom, and I was currently licensing it to them for exactly $1 a year. That is a very generous offer, Jasmine, I replied smoothly. But my wardrobe is perfectly suited for my daily responsibilities. I prefer to keep things practical. Jasmine sighed softly, giving me a patronizing smile. Suit yourself, honey, but do not be surprised when people treat you exactly how you present yourself to the world. You have to dress for the power you want. I do not need to dress for power, Jasmine, I said, my voice dropping to a quiet, steady register. I already know exactly how much power I have. She blinked, her perfect smile faltering for just a fraction of a second. She opened her mouth to reply, but the heavy oak doors of the executive suite swung open behind her. Trent emerged looking like a man who had just conquered the world. He had his suit jacket slung over one shoulder and a smug grin plastered across his face. "There is my beautiful wife," Trent announced, pulling Jasmine into a dramatic kiss. He looked over at me and chuckled. "Still here, Sienna. I thought you would be busy updating your resume after our little morning chat." Jasmine laughed softly, leaning into Trent. "Leave her alone, babe. She is just focused on her spreadsheets. Tell me about our celebration plans." Trent puffed out his chest. "I called Belmont's. We are doing the chef tasting menu tonight to celebrate the Horizon victory. I booked the private dining room. The whole family is coming. Dad insists we do it right. $4,000 just for the food and wine, but when you bring in the kind of revenue I do, you deserve to celebrate like royalty. I just locked down the biggest account in Caldwell history. They completely bought into my vision for the supply chain." He looked at me, his eyes gleaming with malicious intent. "You are coming right, Sienna," Trent asked, his voice thick with condescension. "Since you helped print out the data binders for my presentation, it is only fair you get a free meal out of it. Besides, we need someone to take the family photos." The sheer audacity of the invitation would have broken the old me. He was taking the credit, taking the money, and inviting me to watch him celebrate my hard work. But the old me was gone. The woman standing before him was merely counting down the hours. I looked at my brother and his glamorous wife. They were standing on a trap door, and they were begging me to pull the lever. I would not miss it for the world. "Trent," I said, giving him a flat, lifeless smile, "I will see you both tonight." The private dining room at Belmont's was a masterclass in aggressive opulence. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm glow over heavy mahogany tables draped in white linen. I arrived exactly at 8 to find my family already seated halfway through their first round of vintage champagne. My father occupied the head of the table, looking like a monarch surveying his court. Trent and Jasmine sat to his right, leaving the chair nearest the kitchen door for me. I took my seat quietly, placing my handbag on the floor. Nobody paused their conversation to acknowledge my arrival. Trent was busy recounting a golf game to our father while Jasmine scrolled through her phone, checking her real estate listings. The waiter arrived to pour my water, but my father waved him away, instructing him to bring the reserve wine list instead. I sat in silence, watching the people who were supposed to be my family operate as an exclusive club that had revoked my membership years ago. When it was time to order, Trent took control of the table. He did not ask what anyone wanted. Instead, he ordered the chef tasting menu for the entire group, adding imported truffles to every course. Jasmine requested 2 bottles of a rare Bordeaux that I knew cost $800 each. My father nodded in approval, praising Trent for his excellent taste. I looked at the menu, noting the astronomical prices, but kept my face perfectly neutral. The waiter collected our menus and vanished. The celebration of my brother was officially underway. Trent launched into a highly embellished story about how he single-handedly convinced the Horizon Supermarket's executives to sign the contract. He described his firm handshake, his persuasive arguments, and his unmatched charisma. He conveniently left out the part where the executives demanded hard data, and he had to frantically call me to generate the predictive models that actually secured their signature. The food arrived in a parade of meticulously plated courses. Seared scallops, wagyu beef, and delicate portions of duck confit filled the table. As we ate, the conversation flowed entirely around me. It was as if a physical wall existed between my chair and the rest of the room. My father proposed a toast, raising his glass high. To Trent, he declared, his voice booming across the private room. The man who is taking Caldwell Logistics into the future. A true visionary and the best salesman this company has ever seen. Jasmine clinked her glass against his, her diamonds catching the chandelier light. I raised my water glass, taking a small sip. I watched them celebrate a victory built entirely on my intellectual property. The software I had coded in my tiny graduate apartment was the only reason they were sitting in this room. The algorithm that saved them millions was currently running on my private servers. They were toasting to an illusion. Halfway through the main course, Jasmine finally directed her attention to me. She wiped her mouth with a linen napkin, offering a pitying smile. "So, Sienna," she began, her voice carrying across the table. "Have you given any thought to my makeover offer? You really need to start networking if you ever want to move up from your little computer desk. Maybe find a nice man who can take care of you." My father chuckled, cutting a piece of steak. "Do not bother Jasmine. Sienna lacks the killer instinct required for real success. She is comfortable in the background, playing with her spreadsheets." Trent smirked, swallowing a large sip of wine. "Exactly. We need her doing the grunt work so the real executives can shine." I looked at my plate, slicing a piece of asparagus. I did not defend myself. Defending myself would imply that their opinions carried weight. Dessert consisted of gold leaf chocolate tortillas. The heavy mahogany door opened, and the maitre d' stepped inside, carrying a sleek black leather folder. He placed it precisely next to Trent's right hand. The $4,000 bill had finally arrived. The room grew quieter as Trent flipped open the folder. Then the performance began. He patted his suit jacket pockets, morphing his expression into a mask of exaggerated confusion. He checked his pants pockets, sighing loudly. "Oh, wow," Trent said, shaking his head. "I left my wallet in my other suit jacket." Jasmine gasped. "Oh no, babe." "And I left my cards in my other purse." Trent looked at our father with a sheepish grin. "Dad, can you cover this one? I will wire you the money tomorrow, I swear." My father frowned, reaching into his pocket, but stopped. He looked down the table, his gaze landing squarely on me. His eyes narrowed. "Actually," Richard Caldwell said, his voice dripping with authority, "Sienna is going to pay for this dinner." Trent chuckled, leaning back. "Yeah, Sienna, you asked for a raise today, right? Show us you are management material." I kept my hands resting quietly on my lap. "I did not consume the expensive wine or the caviar," I said evenly. "I only had water and a basic salad." My father slammed his hand onto the table. "Do not be ungrateful," he snapped. "We put a roof over your head when you were a child. Consider this $4,000 bill a minor rent payment for the decades we spent raising you. Pay the bill, Sienna. That is a direct order." They expected me to cry or argue. They wanted a reaction. But I was no longer their victim. I reached into my handbag and retrieved a corporate credit card registered to the anonymous tech firm I legally owned. I placed my card inside the folder, handing it to the maitre d'. "Please run this," I told him. The waiter returned minutes later. I signed my name with perfect precision. I gathered my bag, pushing my chair. "Enjoy the meal, Trent," I said, looking dead into his eyes. "It is the last free ride you will ever get." I walked out of the private dining room, leaving them in stunned silence. The heavy mahogany door shut with a satisfying click, cutting off whatever protest my father was trying to formulate. The air outside was crisp and cool, a sharp contrast to the suffocating atmosphere I had just escaped. I stood there for a moment, breathing in the fresh night air, feeling a profound sense of clarity wash over me. I pulled my coat tighter, waiting for the valet to bring my car around. The valet handed me my keys with a polite nod, and I tipped him generously. My mind replayed the image of Trent's face when I handed over that corporate credit card. He assumed I was draining my personal savings to fund his extravagant lifestyle. He assumed I was breaking under their financial bullying. He had absolutely no idea the card I used was tied to an account generating more interest in a single day than his annual bonus. The card belonged to Novatech LLC, an anonymous corporate entity I registered 6 years ago. It was my ultimate insurance policy against a family that never truly valued my contributions. As I slid into my car, my thoughts drifted back to graduate school. I was drowning in student debt because my father refused to pay for a degree he deemed entirely useless for a woman. While Trent was handed a corner office and a six-figure salary straight out of undergrad, I was spending my nights writing complex code in a cramped studio apartment. That was when I built the framework for the Caldwell Root Sync software. It started as a thesis project, an elegant algorithmic solution designed to optimize massive logistical supply chains. I poured thousands of hours into perfecting the machine learning protocols, feeding it dummy data until it could map shipping routes faster and more efficiently than any human dispatcher on the planet. When my father reluctantly offered me a low-level data entry position at Caldwell Logistics, I saw an opportunity to test my software in the real world. But I knew my father. I knew his insatiable need to control everyone around him. If I brought the software to him as an employee, he would claim it was company property under a standard invention assignment agreement. He would steal my life work, just like Trent stole credit for the Horizon contract. So I protected myself. I finalized the code on my personal equipment before my first day on the payroll. I registered the intellectual property under Novatech LLC. Then I presented the compiled software to my father as a third-party vendor solution. I pitched it as a trial run and offered his company a restricted use license for exactly $1 a year. My father thought he was pulling off the negotiation of the century. He laughed at my apparent lack of business sense, eager to exploit what he assumed was my naive desperation for approval. He signed the licensing agreement without having his corporate attorneys review the fine print. If he had read the contract, he would have seen the termination clause. The license granted Caldwell Logistics the right to use the compiled software, but retained all ownership of the source code with Novatech LLC. Most importantly, the agreement stipulated that the license could be immediately revoked without prior notice if my employment with the company was terminated for any reason. I had essentially built a multi-million-dollar digital fortress right under his nose, and he eagerly handed me the keys. The weekend passed in a blur of quiet preparation. When Monday morning finally arrived, I pulled into the Caldwell Logistics parking garage 2 hours before the rest of the executive team usually showed up. The building was empty and silent, save for the muted hum of the fluorescent lights overhead. I walked into my glass-walled office and retrieved a single small cardboard box from the supply closet. I moved methodically, gathering my personal belongings with zero hesitation. I did not have much to pack. A framed copy of my master's degree which my father had never once asked to look at. A ceramic coffee mug I had bought during a weekend trip to the coast. A small potted succulent that had somehow survived the sterile corporate environment. I placed them gently into the box. I deliberately left all the corporate assets exactly where they belonged. The dual monitors, the company-issued laptop, the external hard drives, they all stayed perfectly aligned on the desk. I wiped my personal credentials from the local machines and logged out of the network for the final time. I looked through the glass walls at the massive server room across the hall. Those blinking green lights represented the beating heart of Caldwell Logistics. They were currently processing thousands of active delivery routes, coordinating drivers, and managing the fragile supply chain for clients like Horizon supermarkets. The entire empire was running smoothly, completely oblivious to the fact that the brain keeping it all alive was about to walk out the front door and never return. I picked up my cardboard box and held it under one arm. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my personal cell phone. I scrolled through my contacts until I found the number I had saved exactly 1 month ago. It was the direct personal line for Dominic Reed, the 42-year-old Chief Executive Officer of Apex Global. Apex was the massive multinational transportation conglomerate that served as my father's biggest and most ruthless industry rival. I tapped the screen and held the phone to my ear, listening to it ring. Dominic answered on the second ring, his voice sharp and alert despite the early hour. Hello, Sienna? I smiled, looking at my very empty desk. Good morning, Dominic, I said, my voice echoing slightly against the glass. I am calling to ask a simple question. Is that Vice President of Technology position still open? Dominic laughed softly on the other end of the line. It was a rich, confident sound filling the quiet space of my office. I have been waiting for this call for 6 months, Sienna, he said. I knew Richard and Trent would push you too far. The Vice President of Technology position is absolutely open and has your name written all over it. I smiled, looking out the glass walls at the blinking servers across the hall. I am ready to make a move, Dominic, but I need to know the terms before I walk out this door. Dominic did not hesitate. He laid out a compensation package, making the breath catch in my throat. The base salary was 4 times what my father paid me. He offered comprehensive executive benefits, a massive signing bonus, and generous stock options in Apex Global. It was a package reserved for top-tier industry talent. It was the validation my family denied me for 6 years. I accept the offer, Dominic, I replied, keeping my voice perfectly steady and resolute. When exactly do you want me to start working? How about right now, he suggested. I will have legal draft the employment contract and send it to your personal email within the hour. Welcome to Apex Global, Sienna. We are going to dominate the logistics market together. I ended the call quickly, feeling an incredible surge of pure adrenaline. The transition from undervalued back-office employee to highly compensated executive at a multinational conglomerate took exactly 4 minutes. I opened my laptop and created a blank document. It was time to sever my ties with Caldwell Logistics permanently. I typed out a standard resignation letter, keeping the language professional and devoid of emotion. I stated clearly that I was resigning from my position as lead data architect, effective immediately. I noted that I was waiving the customary 2-week notice period due to an irreconcilable breakdown in the working relationship. I printed my name and added a digital signature. Then I opened a second document. This one was infinitely more important than my resignation. It was drafted on the official corporate letterhead of Novatech LLC. The title read, Formal Legal Revocation of Intellectual Property License. The legal phrasing was airtight and brutally specific. It outlined that Caldwell Logistics violated the terms of the original $1 licensing agreement due to the termination of my employment. As a direct result, all rights and access to the Caldwell Route Sync software were immediately revoked. Caldwell Logistics no longer possessed the legal authority to utilize the proprietary routing algorithm. I connected my laptop to the secure executive printer down the hall. I hit print and listened as the heavy machinery hummed to life. The printer spat out 2 crisp pieces of paper that would single-handedly dismantle my father and his corporate empire. I picked up the pages, holding them carefully in my right hand. I grabbed my small cardboard box of personal belongings with my left arm. I took one final look at my functional glass-walled office, ensuring I left no trace of personal data on their local network. I walked slowly down the thick, plush-carpeted hallway, heading straight toward the executive suite. The morning sun was just beginning to filter through the massive windows, casting long shadows across the expensive artwork lining the walls. My father had already arrived for the day, though his personal assistant was nowhere to be seen. I knew he always came in early on Mondays to practice his putting before the mandatory staff meetings began. I pushed open the heavy oak door to his office without knocking. The room smelled of fresh coffee and expensive leather. My father was standing near the window, leaning over a small putting green he installed near the corner. He had a golf club in his hands and his phone pressed tightly against his ear. He was loudly negotiating a prime tee time at his exclusive country club with one of his wealthy golfing buddies. He glanced up as I walked into the room. His eyes narrowed in immediate annoyance at the interruption. He waved his hand dismissively, making a shooing motion with his fingers, silently demanding that I leave his presence. He did not bother to lower the phone or pause his conversation about the upcoming weekend tournament. I did not speak a single word to him. I simply walked forward, crossing the vast expanse of his luxurious office. I stopped directly in front of his massive mahogany desk. I placed the two pieces of paper perfectly centered on the polished wood surface. I made sure the resignation letter was on top, shielding the legal revocation document directly underneath it. I turned around smoothly and walked right out. My flat shoes made soft thudding sounds against the thick carpet. I moved down the hallway past the gallery of oversized egos and stepped into the main lobby. I pushed through the heavy glass front doors of Caldwell Logistics, stepping out into the cool, crisp morning air. I walked toward my car feeling a profound sense of liberation. I was leaving that life behind forever. Back in his lavish office, my father finally finished his loud phone call and carelessly tossed his golf club onto the leather sofa. He walked over to his mahogany desk and frowned at the papers I left behind. He picked up the top sheet, reading the bold word, resignation, printed at the top. He rolled his eyes, letting out a loud scoff of disdain. Assuming I was throwing a childish tantrum over the denied raise, he crumpled the resignation letter and threw it into the trash. He blindly picked up the thick second paper. He did not bother to read the legal title or the dense paragraphs of text. He simply tossed the highly formal legal revocation document directly into his dusty, overflowing later tray, completely unaware he had just discarded the very survival of his entire company. 48 hours later, I sat behind a massive desk in my brand new corner office on the 40th floor of the Apex Global Headquarters. The transition from the stifling environment of my family business to this pinnacle of corporate respect had been seamless. Dominic Reed had spared absolutely no expense in making me feel valued. The office featured panoramic views of the Seattle skyline, thick carpeting that absorbed every sound, and an integrated smart dashboard that put the entire Apex network at my fingertips. I pressed a button on the gleaming built-in machine behind my desk, and the rich aroma of a premium dark roast espresso filled the air. I took a slow, deliberate sip, savoring the bitter, complex flavor, while appreciating the quiet atmosphere. There were no petty insults here. There were no demands to fetch coffee or print out presentation binders for incompetent executives. I was the Chief Technology Officer in all but official title pending the final board approval, and I had an entire department of highly skilled developers waiting for my directives. Dominic walked past my open door, flashing a respectful smile and a quick nod of acknowledgement, before heading to his own executive suite down the hall. He treated me like a peer. He treated me like the mastermind I was. As I enjoyed the perfect temperature of my espresso, I glanced at the digital clock on my secondary monitor. It was exactly 9 in the morning on Wednesday. According to the automated sequence I had quietly programmed into the Novatech server matrix, the 48-hour grace period for the revoked intellectual property license was officially expiring right at this very second. I leaned back in my ergonomic leather chair, steepling my fingers together. I did not need to be physically present at Caldwell Logistics to see the absolute devastation unfolding across town. I knew the architecture of that network better than I knew my own heartbeat. I built it to be flawless, and I built it to defend itself against unauthorized access. The moment the central clock struck 9, the license verification ping sent from the Caldwell mainframe to my anonymous secure servers returned a fatal error. The response was immediate and entirely automated, executing exactly as I had designed it to function. Across the city, the massive server room at Caldwell Logistics, the same room I used to gaze at through my old glass walls, suddenly erupted into chaos. The cooling fans ramped up to maximum speed as the processors spiked, trying to resolve the missing authentication tokens. Then the automated kill switch engaged. The primary routing servers shut down simultaneously, severing the vital connection to the remote cloud database. On the main dispatch floor, the giant wall-mounted GPS monitors that tracked every active fleet vehicle flickered rapidly. The vibrant green and blue lines mapping out the most efficient cross-country routes glitched, digitized, and then vanished completely. The screens went entirely black, reflecting only the horrified faces of the dispatch team. Red warning sirens began to blare loudly through the facility, overhead speakers signaling a massive, completely catastrophic network failure. The digital lifeblood of Caldwell Logistics stopped pumping in a single devastating instant, leaving them utterly powerless. The fallout was not just confined to the corporate office. The operational ripple effect was instantaneous and completely paralyzing to the business. Across the country, hundreds of Caldwell delivery trucks were suddenly stranded. Drivers navigating complex interstate highways saw their dashboard routing tablets flash a fatal system error before locking them out entirely. Trucks hauling thousands of pounds of perishable goods pulled into rest stops and way stations completely blind to their destination protocols. Without my algorithm calculating the precise fuel-efficient paths, predicting traffic patterns, and scheduling warehouse docking bay times, the entire supply chain collapsed into a tangled, unmanageable mess. At a massive distribution center in Nevada, a fleet of 18-wheelers carrying temperature-sensitive cargo for Horizon supermarkets sat idling at the gates, unable to receive clearance codes. The drivers jammed the radio frequencies, desperately calling the central dispatch office for manual coordinates, but the dispatchers had nothing to give them. They were staring helplessly at completely dead monitors without any backup system available. The fragile company was rapidly bleeding hundreds of thousands of dollars with every single passing minute of system downtime. Sitting in my tranquil corner office at Apex Global, I placed my empty espresso cup on a sleek stone coaster. The absolute silence of my new workspace was broken only by the aggressive vibrating of my personal cell phone resting on the polished desk surface. I calmly watched the digital screen light up with incredibly frantic urgency. The bright caller identification proudly displayed the name of my arrogant older brother. I did not reach for the device. I simply watched it violently vibrate its way across the smooth mahogany desk. When the call went to voicemail, the screen immediately lit up again. I swiped the notification panel down to reveal the staggering history of his panic. Trent had already left 30 unread text messages filled with rapidly increasing levels of aggressive profanity and pure sheer terror. He was clearly and completely losing his fragile mind, as the brutal reality of his so-called sales victory crashed down heavily around him. The Horizon executives were undoubtedly screaming at him, demanding to know why their precious cargo was stranded in the desert. I looked at the missed call log. There were 45 missed calls from Trent. The phone buzzed again, adding another notification. Now there were 46 missed calls. The phone buzzed once more. Then came 47 missed calls. I smiled softly, feeling a truly profound sense of poetic justice wash over me. The persistent electronic device vibrated yet again. This desperate ring was the 48th attempt to reach me. I slowly reached out, picked up the heavy phone, swiped the bright green icon, and pressed the loudspeaker directly to my ear. Sienna, where the hell are you? The voice of my older brother exploded through the phone to make me hold the device away from my ear. Background noise bled through the connection, painting a vivid auditory picture of the panic unfolding on the Caldwell Logistics dispatch floor. I could hear sirens wailing and multiple people shouting over each other. Trent was breathing heavily, his voice cracking under the immense strain of the catastrophic system failure. "You need to get into the office right now," he bellowed. "The entire network is down. The GPS monitors are completely black. We have hundreds of trucks sitting idle on the highways, and the Horizon Supermarkets executives are threatening to tear up the contract I just signed. Fix it right now." I leaned back in my chair, swiveling slightly to look out the massive windows at the Seattle skyline. I took another slow sip of my premium espresso, savoring its flavor. "I am afraid I cannot help you with that, Trent," I replied, keeping my vocal tone professional. "I no longer work for Caldwell Logistics." I submitted my formal resignation on Monday morning. "Did you not check your father-owned desk? Do not play games with me, you vindictive little brat," Trent screamed, his voice echoing through my office. "I know exactly what you did. You hacked into our mainframe because you were throwing a massive temper tantrum over a tiny 5% raise. You intentionally planted a virus to sabotage my biggest client. This is a federal crime, Sienna. You are destroying company property. I am standing here with the head of our information technology department, and he says the servers are locked out. Turn the system back on this very second, or I swear to God I am calling the FBI and having you arrested for cyber terrorism. The sheer desperation in his voice was a symphony of poetic justice. He was flailing wildly, grasping at ridiculous legal threats, because he possessed zero understanding of how the digital infrastructure functioned. He believed I was a petty hacker rather than a meticulous architect. Trent, I am going to stop you right there before you embarrass yourself further, I said smoothly. I did not hack the Caldwell Logistics mainframe. I did not plant a virus or deploy malware. I simply allowed a contract to reach its natural expiration date. What the hell are you talking about? Trent demanded. What expiration date? We own that software. You built it while you were on our payroll. It is company property. I placed my empty espresso cup on the polished stone coaster. Trent, the company does not own a single line of that source code. I built the Caldwell Route Sync algorithm during my master degree program entirely on my own time and using my own personal hardware. The intellectual property belongs exclusively to a private corporation named Novatech LLC. If your father had bothered to read the vendor agreements before signing them, he would have realized that Caldwell Logistics only held a restricted use license for the compiled software. He paid Novatech LLC exactly $1 a year for the privilege of utilizing my proprietary system. And as the sole owner of Novatech LLC, I included a very clear termination clause. The license was strictly contingent upon my active employment. The moment I resigned, the license was legally revoked. The automated system simply verified my employment status, found it lacking, and restricted your unauthorized access. You are currently locked out because you no longer have my permission to use my property. The silence on the other end of the line was absolute and profoundly satisfying. For the first time in his privileged 36 years of life, my golden boy brother was entirely speechless. I could practically hear the gears grinding in his head as the devastating reality of his situation crashed down upon him. He was standing in a room full of dead monitors, realizing that his brilliant sales victories and massive revenue streams were completely dependent on the sister he had mocked and belittled just a few days prior. "You own it," Trent whispered, his voice suddenly devoid of all its previous arrogance. "You own the entire routing system. You set us up from the very beginning." "I did not set you up." "Trent," I corrected him sharply. "I protected myself from a family that constantly stole my credit and undervalued my labor. I handed you the keys to a multi-million-dollar digital empire for a single dollar, and you still treated me like a disposable intern. Now the trial period is over. The software is mine, and you have absolutely nothing to offer your precious corporate clients. Without my data models, your logistics company is just a collection of empty warehouses and blind drivers." The shock quickly morphed back into aggressive rage. "You are not going to get away with this," Trent snarled, his voice vibrating with pure malice. "You think you can just steal the lifeblood of our family business and walk away? Dad is already contacting the senior corporate attorneys. We are going to bury you in endless litigation. We are coming to that depressing little rat-hole apartment of yours right now to serve you with a massive lawsuit. You are going to end up in a prison cell, Sienna." I laughed softly, leaning forward to rest my elbows on the smooth mahogany surface of my massive new desk. "You are more than welcome to try and serve me, Trent," I said, my tone dripping with icy confidence. "But you will not find me at that old apartment anymore. I moved out yesterday. If you and your lawyers want to hand me legal documents, you can bring them to the penthouse suite at the Azure Tower in the downtown financial district. Tell the private concierge in the lobby that you are here to see the new Chief Technology Officer of Apex Global. I will make sure security lets you up." I ended the call and placed the phone face down on my desk. The sheer silence that followed was incredibly peaceful. I spent the remainder of my Wednesday familiarizing myself with the Apex Global infrastructure, leaving the burning wreckage of Caldwell Logistics in my rearview mirror. By Thursday evening, I was settling into my new residence. The penthouse suite at the Azure Tower was a sprawling masterpiece of modern architecture. It encompassed the entire top floor, offering an unobstructed 360-degree view of the Puget Sound and the Seattle skyline. I had purchased it in cash through Novatech LLC months ago, using the massive licensing dividends I had quietly accumulated. At exactly 7 o'clock, the private intercom on my wall chimed. The lobby concierge spoke in a hushed, respectful tone, informing me that 4 individuals were aggressively demanding access to my floor. He listed the names: Richard Caldwell, Trent Caldwell, Jasmine Caldwell, and a man identifying himself as their senior corporate counsel. I smiled, taking a sip of the herbal tea I had just brewed. "Send them up," I instructed the concierge. The private elevator opened directly into my expansive foyer. The heavy steel doors slid apart with a soft mechanical whisper, revealing my furious family. They marched into the penthouse like an invading army fully prepared to intimidate and conquer. But their aggressive momentum faltered the very second they crossed the threshold and absorbed their surroundings. The sheer scale and extreme wealth of the Azure Tower penthouse hit them like a physical blow. The living room featured soaring ceilings, imported marble, and custom lighting fixtures. Jasmine walked in behind Trent and completely stopped in her tracks. As a highly successful luxury real estate broker, she possessed an intimate understanding of the Seattle property market. I watched her hands fall to her sides as she took in the space. She took in the custom finishes, the smart glass windows, and the sheer massive square footage of the penthouse. I knew exactly what was going through her mind. She was calculating the listing price. She knew this specific unit cost upwards of $10 million. The condescending pity she had directed at my sensible shoes and my old apartment just a few days ago evaporated entirely. Jasmine realized in real time that my supposed poverty was a deliberate camouflage. I had been infinitely wealthier than her, and Trent combined this entire time. Richard recovered his voice first. He stormed across the hardwood floors, his face flushed with profound confusion and explosive anger. He marched right up to the massive marble kitchen island where I stood waiting. Trent flanked him, trying to maintain his arrogant posture, but his eyes kept darting nervously toward the stunning panoramic views of the city below. "This little charade ends tonight," my father bellowed, slapping his hand onto the marble. "You have caused millions of dollars in damages to my company. You have stranded our drivers and humiliated us in front of the Horizon Supermarket's executives. I do not know how you managed to secure this apartment or this fraudulent job title, but your pathetic rebellion is officially over." I took another calm sip of my tea. "It is not a rebellion, Richard," I replied, abandoning the title of father. "It is a highly successful career transition." The older man behind them stepped forward in a gray suit carrying a leather briefcase. He adjusted his glasses. "Ms. Caldwell, my name is Harrison, and I am the senior corporate counsel representing Caldwell Logistics. We are here to resolve this unfortunate internal dispute before it escalates into a devastating criminal matter." He pulled a stack of legal documents from his briefcase and pushed them aggressively toward me. "This is a formal cease and desist order," Harrison stated, his voice laced with practiced legal intimidation. "And beneath it is a comprehensive transfer of assets agreement. Your father is willing to be incredibly lenient given your familial relationship. If you sign these documents right now and immediately hand over the complete source code to the routing software, Caldwell Logistics will agree not to press federal charges for corporate sabotage and cyber terrorism." Trent crossed his arms, smirking confidently. "You heard him, Sienna. You played a dangerous game and lost. Give us the access keys right now, or you are leaving this fancy apartment in handcuffs." Jasmine remained entirely silent. She was still staring at the custom-imported chandelier above the dining table, her mind clearly short-circuiting as she processed the impossible reality of my hidden wealth. My father leaned over the marble island, trying to use his physical presence to intimidate me. "Just sign the paperwork, Sienna," he demanded, his voice dropping to a harsh, threatening growl. "Hand over the software, and I will pretend this massive betrayal never happened." I might even let you keep your old desk in the back office. I looked down at the threatening legal document sitting on my pristine marble counter. The cease and desist order was filled with empty, aggressive jargon. The transfer of assets agreement was a desperate, pathetic attempt to steal my intellectual property through sheer intimidation. They genuinely believed they could march into my home and bully me into surrendering my multi-million-dollar creation, just like they had bullied me into submission my entire life. I did not even bother to read their worthless paperwork. I did not touch the pen Harrison had aggressively placed beside the documents. Instead, I reached into the sleek custom drawer built into the kitchen island. I pulled out a pristine, heavily reinforced manila folder. I placed it directly on top of their cease and desist order. I slid the folder smoothly across the marble surface, pushing it squarely into the hands of their senior corporate attorney. "I suggest you read that very carefully, Harrison," I said, my voice echoing with absolute unshakable authority. "It is a fully authenticated registration file stamped and certified by the United States Copyright Office." Harrison opened the manila folder. The arrogant sneer on his face melted away as his eyes scanned the first page. The silence became suffocating. Harrison flipped to the second page. His hands started to tremble. As a corporate attorney, he recognized a bulletproof legal defense. "I registered the algorithm and its source code with the federal government 6 months before I stepped into my father's office. I established an ironclad chain of custody. The timestamps were indisputable. The code was mine." Jasmine shifted uncomfortably, looking between the lawyer and the massive windows, struggling to reconcile the enormous wealth surrounding her with the woman she mocked days ago. Trent paced, running his hands through his hair. "What does it say?" Trent demanded. "Tell her she goes to federal prison." Harrison carefully closed the folder, placing it back onto the pristine marble counter. He took off his reading glasses. The color completely drained from his face, leaving him looking pale and old. "Mr. Caldwell," Harrison said, turning to my father. His voice was a whisper. "She owns it. She owns every byte of data and every proprietary routing sequence. We have zero legal claim to this software, none at all." My father staggered back as if Harrison punched him in the chest. "What are you talking about?" he roared, his face turning crimson. "She built it while working for me. It is company property. I pay her salary. You paid her to manage data." Harrison corrected him. "She licensed a pre-existing software package to your firm through an anonymous limited liability company. You signed the agreement yourself, sir. The license is entirely contingent upon her active employment. You rented a supercomputer for $1 a year and the rental agreement expired. If you sue her, she will counter-sue and win. The cease and desist is worthless." Trent lunged, slamming his fist on the marble island. "You incompetent old fool," he screamed. "You are supposed to protect the company, find a loophole. There is no way my little sister outsmarted an entire floor of corporate lawyers." "She did not outsmart the lawyers," Trent Harrison replied, packing his documents back into his briefcase. "She outsmarted you. Drop the hostility. You have no leverage. You are entirely at her mercy." The reality crashed down upon my father. The bluster and rage defining his personality instantly evaporated. The aggressive tyrant who ordered me to pay a $4,000 dinner bill was gone. In his place stood a desperate old man watching his life work burn to the ground. Caldwell Logistics was bleeding money by the second, and he finally understood I was holding the only fire extinguisher. My father took a deep breath, forcing his facial muscles to relax. He smoothed the lapels of his custom suit, taking a slow step toward me. His eyes softened, attempting to project a fatherly warmth I had never genuinely experienced. "Sienna," my father began, his voice dropping to a pleading tone. "Let us take a deep breath. Tempers are running high. We are family. We had our disagreements, and perhaps Trent and I were harsh on you last week. But you cannot destroy the family legacy over a simple office dispute. I built Caldwell Logistics to provide for you and your brother." I stared at him, watching the pathetic manipulation unfold. I did not say a word. I let him keep digging his own grave. Look, my father continued pulling a checkbook from his jacket pocket. I understand you feel undervalued. Let us make things right and keep this in the family. I will write you a personal check right now for $100,000. Consider it a massive retroactive bonus. We buy the software from you fair and square and we go back to work tomorrow like this never happened. Trent nodded eagerly, completely dropping his aggressive posture. Yeah, Sienna. 100 grand is a ton of cash. You could buy a nice car or go on a luxury vacation. Do not tear the family apart over a computer program. Jasmine watched the exchange with wide eyes, her gaze darting between the checkbook and the multi-million-dollar view outside my windows. Even she knew that offer was an absolute insult. I looked down at the checkbook resting on my marble island. $100,000. It was the ultimate slap in the face. It proved they still viewed me as a subservient child who would blindly accept their financial scraps. They believed I would hand over my empire out of a misguided sense of familial duty. I slowly pushed the checkbook back across the marble toward my father. I looked him dead in the eye, feeling pure power. When I came into your office and asked for a 5% raise, you laughed in my face. I said, my voice sharp and cold. You told me that if I valued my compensation more than family loyalty, I should try somewhere else. So I did exactly what you advised. I found somewhere else. My father swallowed hard, his hand trembling slightly as he picked up the checkbook. Sienna, please, he whispered. We are losing hundreds of thousands of dollars an hour. I am fully aware of your operational losses, I replied. Your logistics network is paralyzed. Horizon Supermarkets will cancel their contract by tomorrow morning. Your company is currently worth nothing without my routing algorithm. You do not get to use the family card after spending my entire life treating me like a disposable asset. I picked up my cup of herbal tea, taking a final slow sip before delivering the ultimate reality check. The price for the Caldwell Root Sync software is no longer $100,000, I stated with lethal calm. When I asked for 5%, you told me to try somewhere else. The price is now $15 million. Cash. The silence in the penthouse was absolute. The number hung in the air like a physical weight pressing down on their chests. $15 million. Cash. My father stared at me, his jaw slack, his face drained of all remaining color. He did not have $15 million in liquid capital. Caldwell Logistics was an asset-heavy company tied up in trucks, warehouses, and aging infrastructure. Their cash flow was completely dependent on the daily operations that my software had just paralyzed. Trent opened his mouth to shout another threat, but no words came out. The sheer magnitude of the number completely broke his aggressive facade. He looked at the corporate attorney Harrison, who simply gave a slight grim nod, confirming the harsh reality. They were entirely beaten. Without another word, my father turned around and walked toward the private elevator. His posture was defeated. His shoulders slumped under the crushing weight of his own arrogance. Trent and Jasmine followed close behind him, the heavy steel doors sliding shut to seal them out of my life. Unable to pay the $15 million ransom to save their dying company, Trent and his wife resorted to the only tactic they had left: pure malicious character assassination. Jasmine Caldwell moved through the elite circles of Seattle high society like a venomous predator. As a top-tier luxury real estate broker, she possessed an extensive network of wealthy clients, corporate executives, and influential socialites. She began leveraging every single one of those connections to execute a meticulously planned smear campaign against me. Jasmine hosted lavish weekend brunches at her upscale waterfront listings, pouring expensive champagne, while casually dropping fabricated stories about her sister-in-law. She told investors and industry insiders that I had been forcibly escorted out of the Caldwell Logistics building by private security. She spun a highly dramatic tale, claiming I was caught embezzling hundreds of thousands of dollars from the family business to fund a secret gambling addiction. When people questioned why my father did not press charges, Jasmine would adopt a look of profound fake sympathy. She told them I had suffered a complete psychotic mental breakdown. She whispered that my father was simply too heartbroken to send his mentally unstable daughter to federal prison, so he quietly terminated my employment to cover up the massive scandal. The lies were incredibly vicious, designed to completely destroy my professional reputation before I could secure another position in the corporate industry. She wanted to ensure that no respectable tech firm would ever hire a deranged corporate thief. The rumors spread rapidly through the Seattle corporate grapevine. Within 3 days, several former colleagues and industry acquaintances forwarded me the outrageous stories Jasmine was peddling. They expected me to be furious. They expected me to issue public statements, threaten defamation lawsuits, or retaliate with my own vicious rumors to defend my professional integrity. I did absolutely none of that. Engaging in petty social warfare would only pull me down into the mud where Jasmine thrived. Instead, I maintained total radio silence. I completely ignored the social sabotage and channeled every ounce of my energy into my new empire at Apex Global. While Jasmine was busy sipping mimosas and spreading high school gossip, I was sitting in a state-of-the-art command center mapping out international supply chains. Dominic Reed granted me unprecedented administrative access to the entire Apex network. My dedicated team of senior developers and I worked around the clock integrating the Caldwell Root Sync algorithm directly into their global infrastructure. The results were instantaneous and absolutely staggering. Within the first week of deploying my software, the Apex routing efficiency increased by 22%. We were cutting international transit times, lowering fuel consumption across thousands of cargo ships, and securing massive new accounts that Caldwell Logistics could not even dream of bidding on. I was generating millions of dollars in legitimate corporate value, while my family desperately tried to save their crumbling reputation with cheap lies. My proprietary algorithm proved its worth on a massive global scale, reinforcing my position as the most valuable asset in the entire logistics industry. However, Jasmine drastically underestimated the sheer volatility of the corporate rumors she was actively spreading. She assumed her lies would remain confined to the wealthy socialites attending her open houses and the local country club gatherings. She failed to comprehend that high society gossip inevitably bleeds directly into executive boardrooms. The scandalous stories about embezzlement and catastrophic mental breakdowns at the highest levels of Caldwell Logistics eventually reached the ears of the very people Trent was most desperate to impress: the executive board at Horizon Supermarkets. The grocery giant was already furious about the unexplained delays in their supply chain. Hearing rumors of a massive internal crisis involving stolen funds and terminated executives triggered a massive corporate panic. Horizon operated on incredibly tight margins, and they could not risk their nationwide distribution network on a logistics company suffering from profound structural instability. On Friday afternoon, the chief operations officer of Horizon Supermarkets sent a formal, legally binding demand to my father. They refused to load another shipment until Caldwell Logistics submitted to a full, immediate, and independent system audit. This was an unmitigated disaster for my father and Trent. An independent system audit meant external investigators would comb through their failing servers. The auditors would discover that the state-of-the-art routing algorithm they promised Horizon Supermarkets was entirely missing. They would realize Caldwell Logistics was practically running their massive logistics network on outdated manual spreadsheets and desperate guesswork. My brother had sold Horizon a grand illusion of technological supremacy, and now the curtain was being forcefully pulled back. Jasmine thought she was securing her social standing by destroying my professional reputation. Instead, her vicious high society gossip had inadvertently handed the corporate executioners the exact ammunition they needed to tear down Caldwell Logistics. Horizon's supermarkets demanded immediate accountability, and my family had nothing left to give them. The demand for an immediate and independent system audit from Horizon Supermarkets sent a massive shockwave through the executive floor of Caldwell Logistics. My father and brother were completely cornered. They had exactly 7 days before the external auditors arrived with their clipboards and digital forensics tools. If those auditors plugged into the Caldwell servers and found nothing but manual spreadsheets and an empty void where my proprietary algorithm used to be, the company would be liquidated instantly. Horizon would terminate their contract, triggering a catastrophic breach of contract penalty that would instantly bankrupt the family business. Richard paced his office in a cold sweat while Trent frantically scrolled through his contacts, looking for a miracle. Trent believed he found his salvation on a discount freelance marketplace. Ignoring every single standard corporate protocol for vetting enterprise software developers, Trent hired a cheap offshore coding team based half a world away. He paid them a fraction of what a legitimate enterprise architecture firm would charge, promising them a substantial bonus if they could reverse engineer my entire multi-million-dollar routing software in under 5 days. It was a laughable, impossible request. Rebuilding the complex machine learning protocols and predictive traffic models I had spent years perfecting required deep logistical expertise. Trent simply handed this discount team a few old screenshots of my user interface and barked at them to make it look exactly like the original system. The offshore developers worked around the clock, slapping together a chaotic patchwork of open-source code and incredibly unstable integrations. They did not understand the intricate nuances of commercial fleet management. They did not know how to account for commercial vehicle weight limits, bridge height restrictions, or mandatory driver rest periods dictated by federal transportation laws. They were just building a hollow digital facade. It was a fragile house of cards designed solely to trick the Horizon auditors into believing Caldwell Logistics still possessed a state-of-the-art technological infrastructure. My father authorized the project without requesting a single quality assurance test. He was entirely blinded by panic and sheer desperation. On Friday evening, just 48 hours before the Horizon audit team was scheduled to arrive, Trent slammed his hand down on the launch button. He forced the unverified, untested, and completely unstable software update directly onto the Caldwell Live production servers. The initial dashboard flickered to life, displaying a crude imitation of my original interface. For exactly 1 hour, Trent and my father celebrated in the executive suite. They popped a bottle of cheap champagne, slapping each other on the back, convinced they had successfully outsmarted both me and the massive grocery conglomerate. They genuinely believed that writing a few lines of basic code was enough to replace my master degree level algorithmic architecture. They thought software development was just typing words onto a glowing screen. Meanwhile, I was sitting comfortably in the Apex Global Command Center monitoring the smooth, flawless operation of my newly integrated system. Dominic and I were busy onboarding 3 new international shipping clients who had heard about our upgraded technological capabilities. I did not spend a single second worrying about what my family was doing. I knew the exact mathematical complexity required to run a nationwide logistics network. I knew that any attempt to hotwire a replacement system using discount coders and duct tape would result in an absolute operational massacre. Software engineering is an exact science. You cannot negotiate with broken code. The system demands absolute perfection, and my brother was entirely incapable of delivering it. At 2 in the morning, the fragile house of cards my brother built violently collapsed. Horizon Supermarkets dispatched a massive critical convoy of 40 heavily loaded 18-wheelers from their primary distribution center in Southern California. These were not standard dry goods trucks. They were highly specialized refrigerated containers packed to the absolute brim with premium perishable items. Thousands of pounds of fresh organic produce, imported dairy products, and expensive frozen meats were loaded up and ready for overnight transit. These high-value trucks needed to be routed directly to highly specific climate-controlled regional hubs across the Pacific Northwest before the morning sun caused the exterior temperatures to spike dangerously high. The discount software processed the massive dispatch request and immediately choked on the complex data variables. The unstable code completely inverted the longitudinal and latitudinal coordinates in the central routing matrix. Instead of mapping a smooth, efficient path north toward the cool climate storage facilities in Oregon and Washington, The broken algorithm generated a completely catastrophic set of directions. It bypassed every single logical highway route and locked the new corrupted coordinates into the dashboard navigation systems of all 40 Horizon trucks. The drivers, trusting the corporate technology, blindly followed the digital instructions, leading them far away from the coastline and deep into uncharted logistical territory. They drove straight into the darkness, completely unaware of the disaster unfolding. The sun rose on Saturday morning, revealing a logistical apocalypse of unprecedented proportions. Trent woke up in his expensive suburban home to a ringing phone that would officially end his entire corporate career. The furious dispatch manager on the other end of the line was screaming in absolute, unadulterated panic. The 40 refrigerated containers belonging to Horizon Supermarkets had not arrived at the designated cold storage facilities up north. The massive fleet of trucks was completely lost, running exceptionally low on reserve diesel fuel, and their individual auxiliary refrigeration units were dangerously close to failing under the intense solar heat. The stranded drivers were desperately radioing for immediate assistance, but the central dispatch office was entirely paralyzed by the massive system crash. The highly sensitive produce inside the trailers was already beginning to wilt and spoil rapidly, as the external temperature soared past 100 degrees. Instead of safely delivering the fragile cargo, the broken discount software had forcefully routed the entire multi-million-dollar perishable fleet straight into the absolute middle of the desolate, blistering Mojave Desert. By Sunday afternoon, the desert sun had completely cooked the Horizon Supermarkets cargo. 40 massive transport refrigeration units built to maintain a steady ambient temperature failed under the relentless 100-degree heat. Inside the trailers, thousands of pounds of organic produce turned to absolute mush. Premium dairy products curdled and expanded, bursting through their packaging. High-grade imported meats thawed and began to rapidly spoil, filling the air around the stranded convoy with a putrid, unmistakable stench. The financial damage to the perishable inventory alone was staggering, but the operational damage to Horizon Supermarkets was entirely catastrophic. Their regional distribution centers up north sat completely empty. Store managers across the Pacific Northwest were staring at empty shelves where high-margin items were supposed to be displayed. The grocery giant was forced to issue public apologies to their furious customers while frantically attempting to source emergency replacement inventory at a massive premium. The executive fallout was swift and brutal. At exactly 8 on Monday morning, the legal department at Horizon Supermarkets formally terminated their multi-million-dollar contract with Caldwell Logistics, citing gross negligence and a catastrophic breach of operational integrity. My brother Trent did not even get the opportunity to employ his legendary golf course networking skills to save the account. The Horizon executives refused to accept his frantic, desperate phone calls. Instead, they dispatched a team of aggressive corporate litigators to personally deliver a devastating $10 million lawsuit directly to my father's office. The lawsuit demanded immediate compensation for the spoiled inventory, the emergency replacement costs, and the severe damage to the Horizon brand reputation. It was a lethal financial blow aimed directly at the heart of the family business. The logistics industry is a remarkably tight-knit community, and news of a disaster this monumental could not be contained. By Tuesday morning, the catastrophic routing failure was the lead story across every major supply chain trade publication and digital industry newsletter. The headlines were merciless. Caldwell Logistics strands fleet in desert. The article detailed the spectacular collapse of their routing infrastructure, exposing the fact that the company had attempted to deploy a completely broken, unverified software update over the weekend. Industry analysts aggressively dissected the failure, pointing out the sheer absurdity of routing refrigerated freight directly into the Mojave Desert during a heat wave. They publicly questioned the basic competence of the Caldwell executive team, wondering how a supposedly top-tier logistics firm could suffer such a profound foundational breakdown. The intense media scrutiny completely shattered the vicious high society narrative Jasmine had been carefully cultivating. Her carefully crafted lies about my supposed embezzlement and mental breakdown evaporated instantly under the harsh light of journalistic investigation. Industry reporters diving into the history of Caldwell technological infrastructure quickly discovered the truth. They realized that the company had operated flawlessly for 6 straight years under the quiet, brilliant guidance of a single lead data architect. They noted that the catastrophic system failure occurred mere days after that specific architect formally resigned. The correlation was entirely undeniable. The industry press connected the dots, publishing glowing retrospective articles about my proprietary routing algorithm and the massive void my departure created. The logistics community collectively realized that Sienna Caldwell was not a deranged corporate thief. I was the absolute, undisputed genius who had been holding the entire fragile empire together. I was the architect who built the digital bridge they walked across every single day. My professional reputation, far from being destroyed by Jasmine's social sabotage, was suddenly elevated to legendary status. I was receiving unsolicited recruitment offers from top-tier tech firms across the country, all of them eager to hire the woman whose absence could single-handedly bankrupt a nationwide logistics firm. But I was already comfortably seated in my corner office at Apex Global drinking premium espresso and watching my customized dashboards track thousands of successful on-time deliveries. Caldwell Logistics was bleeding cash at an uncontrollable, terrifying rate. The $10 million Horizon lawsuit was just the beginning. The massive negative publicity triggered a cascade of panic among their remaining client base. Other major corporate accounts spooked by the desert disaster began quietly initiating audits of their own supply chain contracts, looking for legal loopholes to abandon the sinking ship. The bank that held the massive mortgages on the Caldwell truck fleet and distribution warehouses immediately froze their credit lines, demanding an emergency meeting to review the company plummeting valuation. My father was trapped in a rapidly accelerating financial death spiral. He could not run the company without my software, and he could not afford the $15 million price tag to buy it back. He was completely out of options, out of leverage, and out of time. In a state of pure, unadulterated desperation, Richard Caldwell locked the heavy oak doors of his executive office. He drew the blinds, shutting out the frantic chaos unfolding on the dispatch floor below. He sat heavily behind his enormous mahogany desk, the same desk where he had laughed in my face when I asked for a 5% raise. He pulled out his personal cell phone, his hands trembling slightly as he scrolled through his highly exclusive contact list. He bypassed the numbers of his wealthy golfing buddies and his expensive corporate attorneys. He navigated directly to the contact information of his most hated industry rival. He took a shaky breath, swallowing whatever remained of his massive, suffocating pride. He tapped the screen, initiating a highly confidential, completely secret phone call to Dominic Reed, the chief executive officer of Apex Global, hoping to beg for a financial miracle before his entire empire turned to dust. My father stared at his phone screen, his finger hovering over Dominic Reed's direct line. The massive mahogany desk in his executive office felt suffocatingly small compared to the crushing weight of the $10 million Horizon Supermarkets lawsuit sitting right in front of him. Caldwell Logistics was officially bleeding out. The corporate bank accounts were frozen. The entire transport fleet was completely paralyzed, and the logistics industry press was aggressively publishing articles about his spectacular technological collapse. He had absolutely zero leverage left. In a final act of pure desperation, Richard Caldwell pressed the green button and initiated the call he swore he would never make. He called his greatest industry rival, begging for an immediate acquisition to save himself from personal and professional bankruptcy. Dominic answered the phone with the calm, calculated tone of a predator, watching its prey walk directly into a trap. He agreed to host a formal acquisition meeting at the Apex Global headquarters on Tuesday morning. Richard ended the call taking a deep, shaky breath. He needed to present a unified, powerful front to the Apex Global Executive Board. He could not afford to let Dominic Reed see the absolute panic consuming him. He stood up, smoothed the lapels of his expensive custom suit, and walked out of his office to find Trent. The dispatch floor was still a chaotic mess of ringing phones and frantic shouting, but my father ignored it all. He pulled Trent into a private conference room, his face arranged into a mask of supreme, unshakable confidence. He decided to completely hide the impending bankruptcy from his golden boy's son. Trent. My father began, his voice projecting absolute authority. We are shifting our corporate strategy. The Horizon situation is a temporary setback, but it has illuminated a massive opportunity for Caldwell Logistics. I just got off the phone with Dominic Reed. Apex Global wants to acquire our entire company. They recognize the sheer value of our physical assets, our warehouses, and our extensive fleet network. This is not a surrender, Trent. This is a highly strategic merger. We are going to walk into their boardroom tomorrow and negotiate a massive $50 million buyout. So, we are going to cash out at the absolute peak of our valuation and retire as kings. Trent's eyes widened, his chest puffing out with immediate, overwhelming arrogance. $50 million, he repeated, a greedy smile spreading across his face. I knew it. I knew my sales figures would attract a massive corporate buyer. Apex Global is desperate for our market share. We are going to bleed them dry in the negotiations, Dad. I will handle the financial projections. I can easily spin the Horizon disaster as a minor operational glitch. My father nodded, slapping Trent on the shoulder. Exactly. We project absolute strength. Bring Jasmine with you tomorrow. We need to present Caldwell Logistics as a powerful, unified family dynasty. Her high society presence will add significant weight to our negotiating position. We are going to walk out of that building tomorrow as multi-millionaires. The delusion was absolute and entirely pathetic. They genuinely believed they held the winning hand in a game they had already completely lost. Trent rushed home to share the incredible news with Jasmine. He bounded through the front doors of their upscale suburban house, shouting about the massive $50 million acquisition. Jasmine was lounging on the sofa, drinking a glass of expensive imported wine. When she heard the number, she nearly dropped the crystal stemware. The crushing humiliation of the past week, the canceled credit cards, the desperate attempts to maintain her social standing, all of it vanished instantly. She was suddenly going to be the immensely wealthy wife of a corporate titan. Jasmine spent her entire Tuesday morning meticulously planning her new life of unimaginable luxury. She completely ignored the mounting stack of unpaid bills on her kitchen counter. Instead, she opened her laptop and began aggressively browsing high-end real estate listings in the Hamptons. She favorited sprawling multi-million-dollar beachfront estates, picturing herself hosting lavish summer parties for the New York elite. She mentally spent the entire $50 million buyout before the acquisition meeting even began. She selected her outfit for the Apex Global meeting, with obsessive care, choosing a tailored Chanel suit and pairing it with her most expensive diamond jewelry. She wanted to project the image of a woman who was entirely accustomed to extreme wealth. At exactly 9:45 on Tuesday morning, the Caldwell family arrived at the towering glass headquarters of Apex Global. The building was an architectural masterpiece dominating the Seattle skyline with its sleek, modern design. My father, Trent, and Jasmine strode through the massive revolving doors, projecting an aura of aggressive, unearned entitlement. They walked across the polished marble lobby, completely ignoring the stunning digital art installations and the quiet, efficient hum of a truly successful multinational corporation. They approached the main reception desk, where two highly professional administrative assistants were quietly managing the executive schedules. Jasmine leaned heavily against the sleek reception counter, tapping her manicured fingernails impatiently against the polished stone surface. She looked at the young woman behind the desk with a gaze of pure, unadulterated condescension. "We are the Caldwells," Jasmine announced, her voice echoing loudly through the quiet lobby. "Richard Trent and Jasmine Caldwell. We have a 10 o'clock acquisition meeting with Dominic Reed. Please inform him that we have arrived and tell him we expect fresh coffee and sparkling water waiting for us in the boardroom. We have a very tight schedule today, and we do not like to be kept waiting." The administrative assistant remained perfectly composed, unfazed by the aggressive display of arrogance. She typed briefly on her keyboard, verifying the executive schedule. "Of course, Mrs. Caldwell," she replied smoothly. "Mr. Reed is expecting you in the primary executive boardroom on the 40th floor. The private elevator bank is just to your left. Your access badges have already been authorized. My father adjusted his expensive silk tie, flashing a triumphant smile at his son. Trent bumped his shoulder against his father, completely ready to conquer the Apex Global executive team. They walked toward the private glass elevators, genuinely believing they were about to secure the most lucrative financial deal of their entire lives. They stepped into the elevator, the doors sliding shut, to carry them up to the 40th floor. They had absolutely no idea they were walking directly into a meticulously planned corporate execution. The private glass elevator shot directly upward with incredible breathtaking speed, carrying my extremely greedy family to the 40th floor of Apex Global. The ascent was entirely silent, offering a stunning panoramic view of the Seattle harbor that expanded with every passing second. Trent stood near the glass panel, adjusting his expensive silk tie and checking his reflection. He puffed out his chest, projecting an aura of aggressive, unearned confidence. Jasmine stood beside him, holding her limited edition Prada bag like a protective shield. She surveyed the shrinking city below, already viewing it as her personal kingdom. My father remained perfectly still in the center of the elevator, gripping his leather briefcase. He maintained a rigid posture, hiding the sheer panic threatening to consume him. When the elevator finally chimed and the doors glided open, they stepped into an executive reception area that redefined corporate luxury. The space was massive, featuring imported Italian marble floors and sleek custom furniture. A highly professional executive assistant greeted them immediately, directing them down a wide, sunlit corridor. The walls were lined with digital displays tracking real-time international shipping routes. Trent sneered at the screens, convinced he was about to own a massive piece of this multinational empire. The assistant opened a set of towering frosted glass doors, leading them directly into the primary executive boardroom. The room was intimidatingly large, designed specifically to overwhelm visiting negotiators. A massive 20-foot table carved from a single slab of dark walnut dominated the center of the space. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided a dizzying view of the corporate district below. Arranged perfectly on the table were crystal pitchers of sparkling water, silver trays of artisanal pastries, and freshly brewed premium coffee in porcelain carafes. Jasmine immediately walked over to the windows, running her manicured hand along the expensive woodwork. She turned back to Trent, flashing a greedy, triumphant smile. "This is exactly the kind of corporate power we deserve, Trent," she announced, her voice echoing slightly in the vast room. "Once we secure this $50 million buyout, we are upgrading our entire lifestyle. I already found the perfect beachfront estate in the Hamptons. It has 8 bedrooms and a private dock." My father set his briefcase down on the polished walnut table, snapping the brass latches open with a sharp click. He pulled out a stack of carefully forged financial projections. "Focus on the deal, Jasmine," my father commanded, his voice tight with suppressed anxiety. "We have one shot to make this work." Trent pulled out a leather chair and dropped heavily into it, kicking his feet out in a display of extreme arrogance. "Relax, Dad," Trent scoffed, pouring himself a glass of sparkling water. "Dominic Reed is desperate. Why else would he agree to a meeting this fast? He knows Caldwell Logistics holds a massive segment of the domestic market. I am going to negotiate him right into the ground. I will not accept a single penny less than 50 million. I might even push for 60 just to watch him sweat." Trent pulled the financial folders toward him, spreading the fabricated documents across the table. The spreadsheets were completely fraudulent, designed to mask the $10 million lawsuit from Horizon Supermarkets and the catastrophic routing failure in the Mojave Desert. Trent genuinely believed his slick salesman routine could charm a multinational chief executive officer into ignoring standard corporate due diligence. He rehearsed his pitch aloud, boasting about phantom revenue streams and non-existent technological upgrades. He planned to sell Dominic an absolute lie wrapped in corporate buzzwords. Jasmine sat next to him, sipping her coffee and nodding along, blindly trusting her husband and his delusional confidence. She began actively calculating the exact commission she would earn by selling their current upscale suburban house to move into something significantly larger and far more prestigious. My father remained standing, pacing slowly behind his chair. He glanced at his luxury wristwatch, watching the seconds tick by. The silence in the boardroom was growing heavy, oppressive, and incredibly tense. Every minute they waited increased his internal panic. He needed this acquisition to save himself from total financial ruin and the imminent threat of federal fraud charges. Sweat beaded on his forehead despite the perfectly climate-controlled air conditioning pumping through the massive room. He wiped his brow with a trembling hand, desperately attempting to maintain his false facade of executive control, while his entire legacy stood on the absolute brink of total collapse. He repeatedly checked his phone, terrified that another major client had canceled their contract while he was in transit. Trent continued to brag loudly about his negotiation tactics, oblivious to his father and his deteriorating mental state. "I am going to make Dominic Reed beg for our assets," Trent declared loudly, leaning back and crossing his arms over his chest. "I will make him think we have 3 other massive corporate buyers lined up right now. We hold all the leverage here. We control the domestic shipping lanes, and he needs our network to expand his operations." The digital clock on the wall shifted to exactly 10:00. At that precise moment, the heavy oak doors at the far end of the boardroom finally clicked unlocked. The brass handles turned slowly. Trent sat up straight, slapping a highly practiced artificial smile onto his face. Jasmine adjusted her posture, projecting high society elegance. My father stopped pacing, gripping the back of his chair with white knuckles. The doors swung open wide. Dominic Reed walked into the room, projecting absolute lethal authority. He wore a sharp, tailored suit and carried a single digital tablet. But Dominic did not walk toward the head of the walnut table to begin the meeting. Instead, he stopped completely, stepping respectfully to the side. He held the heavy oak door open wide to graciously let his highly anticipated brand-new Chief Technology Officer take the ultimate position of absolute power at the head of the imposing walnut table. I stepped through the heavy oak doors, crossing the threshold into the expansive executive boardroom of Apex Global. I was no longer the undervalued back-office employee wearing sensible shoes and practical cardigans. I wore a tailored charcoal gray Tom Ford suit projecting absolute lethal corporate authority. The sharp lines of the blazer signaled a woman who had entirely conquered her industry. The rhythmic click of my designer heels against the polished marble floor echoed loudly through the cavernous space, demanding the immediate, undivided attention of every single person in the room. I walked with a calculated, measured pace, keeping my head held high and my expression completely devoid of any familial warmth or hesitation. Dominic Reed stood respectfully to the side, allowing me to take center stage. He watched my family with a quiet, knowing smile, fully aware of the psychological devastation about to unfold. I moved directly toward the massive walnut table, my eyes locking onto the 3 people who had spent my entire life trying to make me feel exceptionally small. Trent was shuffling his fabricated financial spreadsheets when he finally looked up and registered my presence. The arrogant, confident smirk instantly vanished from his face, replaced by a mask of profound, unadulterated shock. His jaw went slack. The expensive gold-plated pen he was spinning between his fingers slipped from his grasp. It hit the polished walnut table with a loud, sharp clatter, before rolling off the edge and bouncing onto the imported carpet below. Trent did not attempt to retrieve it. He stared at me, his eyes wide with sheer terror and complete disbelief. His grand illusion of being a master negotiator shattered into a million tiny, unrecognizable pieces. Jasmine sat frozen in her plush leather chair, rendered entirely speechless. The highly successful luxury real estate broker who prided herself on assessing wealth had completely miscalculated her target. She took in the pristine tailoring of my Tom Ford suit, the undeniable aura of executive power radiating from my posture, and the sheer respect Dominic Reed displayed by deferring to my entrance. Jasmine realized in an instant that her vicious high society gossip was an embarrassing, pathetic joke. She spread malicious rumors about an embezzlement scandal, while I actively took control of a multinational technological empire. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. The woman who always had a condescending comment ready was reduced to absolute stunned silence. My father stood paralyzed behind his chair. His knuckles were white where his hands gripped the leather upholstery. The false mask of supreme, unshakable confidence he wore just moments ago violently peeled away, revealing the desperate, terrified old man underneath. His breathing became shallow and erratic. He looked at Dominic, pleading silently for some logical explanation for this bizarre corporate nightmare. He refused to accept the reality standing right in front of him. He refused to believe the daughter he had aggressively dismissed and mocked was now positioned as his ultimate corporate executioner. I reached the head of the massive walnut table and smoothly pulled out the oversized leather chair reserved for the highest-ranking executive in the room. I sat down with deliberate precision, crossing my legs and resting my hands perfectly on the polished wood surface. Dominic took the seat immediately to my right, physically cementing my position of supreme authority. The silence in the boardroom was thick, heavy with the crushing weight of their impending financial doom. They were trapped in a glass cage 40 stories above the ground, and I held the only key. I placed my sleek leather portfolio on the table and slowly flipped it open. I arranged my documents, taking my time, forcing them to endure the agonizing suspense. I looked at the fraudulent spreadsheets Trent had spread across his side of the table and felt a surge of cold, clinical satisfaction. They came here to sell a massive lie to a desperate buyer. They had no idea they were pitching to the exact architect who knew their structural foundation was completely rotten. I raised my head and looked my father dead in the eye. I did not see a patriarch or a powerful chief executive officer. I only saw a man who had built his entire identity on a towering mountain of extreme arrogance and stolen credit. "Good morning, gentlemen," I said, my voice slicing through the heavy silence with lethal, absolute calm. "I am here to conduct the due diligence for the proposed Apex Global acquisition of Caldwell Logistics." The words landed exactly like heavy physical blows. My father staggered slightly, his chest heaving as he gasped for air. The sheer panic finally broke through his paralysis. He slammed his hands flat onto the walnut table, leaning forward in a desperate, pathetic attempt to regain control of the room. "This is a joke," my father stammered, his voice shaking violently. "This is an absolute outrage." "Dominic, what kind of sick game are you playing here? We came to negotiate a highly strategic merger in good faith with the chief executive officer of this corporation. I demand that you step in right now and remove this disgruntled former employee from your boardroom. We will not be insulted by a low-level data analyst who was fired for gross insubordination." Dominic Reed did not flinch or break eye contact even for a single moment. He did not apologize or attempt to placate my furious father. He simply leaned back in his chair, steepling his fingers together. He looked at my father with an expression of pure, icy corporate detachment. "I am afraid you are severely misunderstanding the current organizational structure of this company," Richard Dominic stated calmly, his voice echoing with absolute finality. "Sienna is not a disgruntled former employee. She is the newly appointed Chief Technology Officer of Apex Global. And when it comes to evaluating the technological infrastructure and the core operational value of any potential buyout target, Sienna makes the final call on all tech acquisitions." The sheer finality of Dominic Reed declaring my ultimate authority hung over the massive walnut table. My father sank back into his heavy leather chair, completely deflated. The color vanished from his cheeks, leaving him looking like a fragile, terrified ghost. Trent looked as if all the oxygen had been violently sucked out of the room. Jasmine clutched her limited edition Prada bag against her chest, staring at me with a mixture of absolute horror and dawning realization. Her promised $50 million buyout, the beachfront mansion in the Hamptons, the elevated high society status, it was all burning to ash right in front of her eyes. I did not waste another second on their shock. I opened my sleek leather portfolio and smoothly pulled out a thick stack of highly detailed financial reports. These were not the fabricated, overly optimistic spreadsheets Trent had desperately slapped together to trick a buyer. These were the brutally accurate forensic audits generated by the Apex Global Acquisition team. I slid Trent fabricated financial projections toward the center of the table. Let us finally address your true operational status. I began, my voice echoing with clinical corporate precision. Trent, you came attempting to leverage a $50 million valuation based on projected revenue streams. You claimed the Horizon Supermarkets distribution contract proved Caldwell Logistics was a rapidly expanding powerhouse. You conveniently omitted the fact that your entire logistical infrastructure collapsed into a catastrophic heap of garbage the very second I revoked my software license. I pulled a crisp white document from my folder and pushed it directly in front of my father. I assume you recognize this legal filing, Richard. It is a certified copy of the $10 million breach of contract lawsuit officially filed by Horizon Supermarkets yesterday morning. You tried to replace my master degree level machine learning algorithm with a cheap discount offshore coding team. You let them deploy unstable, unverified software straight onto your live production servers without a single quality assurance test. As a direct result, you forcefully routed 40 refrigerated containers of premium perishable inventory straight into the blistering heat of the Mojave Desert. Horizon is not just terminating your contract. They are going to bankrupt you through aggressive litigation to recoup their massive operational losses. Trent swallowed hard, sweat visibly pooling on his forehead. He tugged at his expensive silk tie, suddenly finding it incredibly restrictive. That was a temporary system glitch. Trent stammered, his voice pitching higher in pure desperation. We can rebuild the routing architecture. We just need a rapid cash injection to hire a better domestic tech team. I shook my head slowly, letting a cold, razor-sharp smile touch my lips. You cannot rebuild my proprietary architecture, Trent. You do not even understand the fundamental mathematics required to calculate regional weight distributions or predictive traffic patterns. Every single sales victory you claimed over the past 6 years was a complete fraud. You walked into executive boardrooms and sold those corporate clients a massive grand illusion. You sold them my brain. You sold them the flawless efficiency of the Caldwell Root Sync system. Now that you no longer have access to my intellectual property, you are just a fast-talking salesman trying to sell empty delivery trucks and broken promises. Your entire client base is already demanding independent system audits. The commercial banks have frozen your operational credit lines. You are currently defaulting on the massive mortgages attached to your regional distribution warehouses across the entire country. Jasmine turned to look at her husband, her flawless makeup unable to mask her absolute disgust. She finally understood that the man she married was entirely hollow. He was a corporate parasite who had fed off his sister relentless labor to fund their lavish suburban lifestyle. Trent refused to meet her gaze, keeping his eyes fixed firmly on the polished wood table. I gathered Trent fabricated spreadsheets, gripping the thick stack of paper in both hands. I tore the documents squarely down the middle, dropping the ripped halves into the center of the walnut table. You walked into this building demanding $50 million. I stated, my voice radiating lethal absolute calm. But the forensic accounting does not lie. Your toxic liabilities vastly outweigh your tangible physical assets. You are drowning in catastrophic debt, facing massive lawsuits, and completely lacking any functional technological core to sustain daily operations. Your valuation is not $50 million. Your valuation is not even $5 million. I leaned forward, resting my forearms on the cool wood-locking eyes with my father. Without my intellectual property, this company is worth exactly $0. My father's hands trembled violently as he reached across the table. His massive, suffocating pride finally completely shattered under the weight of his own profound failure. The arrogant tyrant who demanded I pay a $4,000 dinner bill just days ago was now reduced to a pathetic begging shell of a man. Sienna, please, my father pleaded, his voice cracking with genuine desperate tears. I am begging you, do not do this. Do not destroy your own family. If Apex Global does not buy us out right now, the banks will liquidate everything by Friday. We will lose the houses, the luxury cars, our entire legacy. We will be left with absolutely nothing to our names. You cannot turn your back on your own flesh and blood. You just cannot do it. I looked at the man who had spent 33 long years constantly undermining my absolute self-worth, mocking my intelligence, and treating my hard work like disposable garbage. I felt absolutely no guilt. I felt only pure crystalline closure. I stood up from the executive chair, buttoning the front of my tailored Tom Ford blazer. I looked down at my father with a gaze of unshakable, icy resolve. Business is not about family, I replied, perfectly echoing the exact toxic lesson he had forced upon me my entire life. You taught me that. Dominic Reed stood up from his chair, joining me at the head of the massive walnut table. He buttoned his suit jacket, projecting the same impenetrable corporate authority that defined his entire career. Based on the catastrophic findings, Apex Global is formally passing on the acquisition of Caldwell Logistics, Dominic announced, his voice echoing. We do not purchase toxic assets, and we certainly do not absorb $10 million lawsuits caused by gross operational negligence. This meeting is officially concluded. Security will escort you to the lobby right now so we can return to our actual productive work. My father did not argue. He slowly gathered his empty leather briefcase, moving like a man handed a terminal diagnosis. Trent remained frozen in his chair, staring blankly at the ripped halves of his fraudulent financial projections scattered across the table. Jasmine hastily grabbed her expensive designer Prada bag, standing up with abrupt, terrified, jerky movements. She refused to look at me, her face pale with the terrifying realization that her high society lifestyle was actively evaporating. The private security guards entered the boardroom. My family turned and walked out of the Apex Global headquarters, stripped of their pride, their leverage, and their completely delusional $50 million buyout. The implosion happened with breathtaking, terrifying speed. Without the vital financial lifeline of a massive corporate buyout, my father had absolutely no way to appease his furious creditors. His arrogance finally caught up with him. Within 48 hours, the commercial banks fully revoked their operational credit lines. The automated clearinghouse payments bounced, causing immediate panic among the independent truck drivers and warehouse staff, who desperately relied on their weekly paychecks. By Friday afternoon, the massive $10 million breach of contract lawsuit from Horizon Supermarkets officially hit the public docket. It was the final fatal blow to the crumbling empire. Other major corporate clients scrambled to protect their own supply chains, triggering a mass exodus of active contracts. By Monday morning, exactly 1 week after I handed my father my resignation letter, Richard Caldwell was forced to formally file for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in federal court. He surrendered. The fallout was a spectacular public corporate execution. Court-appointed trustees immediately swooped in to seize control of the remaining corporate assets. The banks foreclosed on the regional distribution centers, locking the gates and shutting off the power. The massive fleet of delivery trucks, the physical manifestation of my family's supposed empire, was grounded and scheduled for public auction to satisfy the mounting mountains of debt. The logistics industry press covered the spectacular downfall with relentless, aggressive journalism. They published detailed postmortems, analyzing how a previously stable nationwide shipping company completely collapsed in a matter of days. Every article pointed to the catastrophic technological failure as the catalyst, further cementing my reputation as the brilliant architect they foolishly drove away. I watched the entire collapse from the tranquil sanctuary of my corner office at Apex Global. I monitored the news alerts and read the bankruptcy filings while drinking premium espresso and integrating advanced machine learning protocols into the Apex Global infrastructure. I expected to feel a twinge of guilt or perhaps a fleeting moment of sorrow for the destruction of the family legacy. I felt absolutely nothing of the sort. There was no grief, there was no pity. There was only a profound, crystalline sense of ultimate closure. I had spent 33 years shrinking myself to fit into their narrow, suffocating expectations. I spent 6 years building their wealth while they mocked my sensible shoes and my back office desk. Watching their empire burn to ash was simply the natural mathematical consequence of their own arrogant actions. They built a house of cards on my back, and I simply stood up. While I was busy directing international shipping lanes and securing multi-million-dollar technological upgrades, my older brother was violently crashing into the brutal reality of his new existence. Trent had built his entire identity around the illusion of endless corporate wealth. He relied heavily on the Caldwell Logistics corporate expense accounts to fund his lavish dinners, his expensive country club memberships, and his luxury vehicles. He operated under the deeply flawed assumption that the company credit lines were his personal, bottomless piggy bank. On Wednesday evening, Trent attempted to maintain his rapidly dissolving facade. He took Jasmine to Belmont's, hoping to smooth over her growing panic with a display of extreme wealth. He wanted to convince her that his father would somehow pull a legal miracle out of thin air to save their lifestyle. They sat in the main dining room ordering the most expensive imported wines and premium steaks, desperately pretending the bankruptcy filings were just a temporary setback. Trent laughed loudly, attempting to project the same aggressive arrogance he wielded when he demanded I pay the dinner bill weeks ago. When the waiter presented the leather check folder at the end of the night, Trent casually tossed down his sleek metal corporate credit card. He leaned back in his chair, boasting to Jasmine about a phantom job offer he claimed to receive from a competing firm. 5 minutes later, the waiter returned. The polite professional smile was gone, replaced by a look of tight, uncomfortable courtesy. The waiter placed the metal card back on the table. "I am incredibly sorry, sir," the waiter said, his voice dropping to a discreet whisper to avoid disturbing the surrounding tables. "Your financial institution has declined this transaction. I attempted to process the payment twice, but the terminal indicates the account has been permanently frozen. Do you perhaps have an alternative method of payment we could use tonight?" Trent's stomach instantly plummeted into a bottomless black void. He snatched the metal card, staring at it as if it had physically burned his fingers. The bank had locked the corporate accounts. The bankruptcy trustees had officially severed his financial lifeline. His extravagant high society luxury lifestyle was now completely, officially over. The immediate aftermath of the declined corporate card at Belmont's hit Jasmine like a physical blow to the chest. She stared at the sleek metal card resting on the white linen tablecloth and felt the blood completely drain from her flawless face. Trent frantically patted his pockets, searching for a personal credit card, but his personal accounts were heavily overdrawn. He had spent the last 2 weeks funding their lavish lifestyle exclusively through the company ledger. The maitre d' stood by the table with an expression of tight professional courtesy masking his profound judgment. Jasmine was forced to reach into her limited edition Prada bag and pull out her own personal debit card, praying the transaction would clear. It did, but it drained the last of her available checking balance. The walk of shame out of the Michelin-starred restaurant was agonizing. The other wealthy patrons, the very people Jasmine normally desperately tried to impress, watched them leave in disgraced silence. There was no $50 million buyout. There was no beachfront mansion in the Hamptons waiting for them. The grand illusion of their corporate royalty had violently shattered, leaving them standing on the cold Seattle pavement with absolutely nothing but mounting catastrophic debt. The rapid descent over the next few weeks was utterly merciless. Trent attempted to leverage his supposed sales expertise to secure an executive position at another logistics firm, but the industry doors slammed firmly in his face. The corporate logistics world is a highly insulated community, and everyone knew exactly who was responsible for the Horizon Supermarkets disaster. No respectable shipping company was going to hire the arrogant vice president who blindly deployed broken software and routed 40 refrigerated containers of premium perishable goods directly into the blistering Mojave Desert. His resume was considered incredibly toxic. Trent was officially and permanently blacklisted, stripped of his arrogant bravado, and relegated to sitting on their expensive living room sofa in silence. Without his massive corporate salary and his stolen bonuses, their upscale suburban lifestyle became completely unsustainable. The warning letters from the commercial bank quickly morphed into aggressive foreclosure notices taped directly to their front door. The sprawling five-bedroom house that Jasmine had meticulously decorated to project an aura of extreme generational wealth was suddenly slipping through her desperate fingers. The bank gave them exactly 30 days to vacate the premises before the local sheriff arrived to physically remove them from the property. Desperation stripped away the last remaining shreds of Jasmine's towering pride. With her husband entirely unemployable and the aggressive corporate bankruptcy lawyers demanding exorbitant upfront retainer fees just to keep them out of federal prison, Jasmine was forced to begin actively liquidating her entire identity. The pristine white Porsche Macan that Trent had purchased with his fraudulent sales bonuses was the very first casualty. Jasmine had to stand on her manicured front lawn and watch in absolute horror as a commercial tow truck hauled away her ultimate automotive status symbol. Next went her meticulously curated designer wardrobe. She packed her custom Chanel suits, her authentic diamond jewelry, and her extensive collection of imported Italian leather shoes into heavy black garbage bags. She hauled the heavy bags to a discreet high-end consignment shop located on the other side of town, praying nobody she knew would see her. Standing at the glass consignment counter, frantically bartering over the heavily discounted resale value of her beloved Prada handbags, was the most profoundly humiliating experience of her entire life. She was quite literally trading the physical manifestations of her superiority just to keep the electricity and the water turned on for one more agonizing week. The ultimate psychological punishment, however, was her complete and unceremonious excommunication from Seattle high society. Jasmine had built her entire highly lucrative luxury real estate career on aggressive social networking and maintaining a flawless image of unshakable affluence. She had eagerly used those exact same high society connections to spread vicious fabricated rumors about my supposed mental breakdown and my fake embezzlement scandal. But the elite circles are notoriously unforgiving to those who publicly fall from grace. The very women Jasmine had hosted at her lavish weekend brunches, the same wealthy socialites who had eagerly consumed her malicious gossip about me, completely turned their backs on her. Her elite real estate clients swiftly terminated their exclusive listing contracts, refusing to trust a broker whose own family was actively embroiled in a massive, highly publicized corporate bankruptcy and federal fraud investigation. Her business phone completely stopped ringing. The coveted invitations to exclusive gallery openings and expensive charity galas vanished overnight. She became a social pariah, a pathetic cautionary tale whispered about over expensive cocktails by the people she once considered her loyal peers. She was entirely isolated, trapped in the burning wreckage of the extravagant life she thought she rightfully deserved. I witnessed the absolute finality of her defeat on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in the back of a sleek black luxury town car, heading back to the Apex Global headquarters after successfully negotiating a massive international shipping contract. My driver navigated through the congested downtown traffic, slowing down near a busy intersection. I glanced out the tinted rain-streaked window and saw a woman standing on the sidewalk waiting for the public bus. She was wearing a plain tan trench coat and holding a cheap, reusable grocery bag. Her shoulders were slumped, her posture entirely devoid of the aggressive, commanding energy she used to project. It was Jasmine. She looked exhausted, weathered, and completely broken by the crushing reality of her new impoverished existence. The town car crawled forward, bringing us perfectly parallel to the bus stop. For one brief, fleeting second, Jasmine lifted her head and looked directly through the tinted glass. Our eyes met. She saw me sitting in the quiet luxury of my chauffeured vehicle, wearing the power and success she had desperately tried to steal. She did not sneer, she did not glare. Jasmine simply lowered her eyes to the wet pavement, physically shrinking into herself, looking away in utter absolute defeat. The town car accelerated away from the bus stop, leaving the pathetic image of my sister-in-law fading into the heavy Seattle rain. I settled back into the plush leather seat and instructed my driver to head directly to the Azure Tower. The rhythmic hum of the vehicle, provided a quiet sanctuary after a long day of intense corporate negotiations. I opened my digital tablet to review the latest global routing metrics for Apex Global. The numbers were flawless. My proprietary algorithm was running at peak efficiency, generating massive revenue streams, while Caldwell Logistics was actively being dismantled by aggressive bankruptcy trustees and federal auditors. I did not waste another second dwelling on the incredibly pathetic encounter with my former brother and his incredibly malicious wife. Her rapid descent into poverty was the direct mathematical result of her own malicious actions. The sky grew increasingly dark and threatening as a severe Pacific Northwest storm rolled violently into the busy city. Sheets of heavy rain lashed against the tinted windows of the town car, obscuring the towering skyscrapers. We pulled into the exclusive circular driveway of the Azure Tower, parking smoothly under the massive illuminated glass awning. The private concierge immediately stepped out of the lobby, holding a large black umbrella to shield me from the torrential downpour. I gathered my leather portfolio and stepped out of the vehicle, adjusting the collar of my tailored suit. The air was bitterly cold, but the entrance to my building was warm and inviting. As I turned to thank my driver, a sudden movement near the edge of the security perimeter caught my attention. A solitary figure was standing entirely exposed to the brutal elements just beyond the reach of the heated awning. The man was completely soaked to the bone. His clothes hung loosely on his frame, plastered to his skin by the freezing rain. He did not have an umbrella. He was shivering violently, his shoulders hunched against the biting wind. The private security guards standing near the glass doors immediately shifted their stance, preparing to intercept the vagrant before he could approach the luxury residence. I raised my hand, signaling the guards to stand down for a moment. I recognized the man standing in the pouring rain. It was Richard Caldwell, the powerful corporate tyrant who used to demand absolute obedience from behind a massive mahogany desk, was now standing on the wet pavement, looking like a fragile, terrified ghost. His expensive custom suit was ruined, heavy with water and stained with city grime. The arrogant, commanding posture that defined his entire existence had completely evaporated. He looked incredibly old and deeply pathetic. My father saw me looking at him and took a hesitant, shaky step forward. The security guards immediately moved to block his path, but I stepped forward into the edge of the rain. I wanted to hear exactly what he had to say. I wanted to witness the final, complete destruction of his towering ego. Sienna. My father rasped, his voice barely audible over the sound of the crashing rain. He took another step, stopping just a few feet away from me. Water dripped from his gray hair, running down his face and soaking into his collar. He raised his trembling hands, holding them out in a gesture of pure desperation. "Please, Sienna, I need to talk to you. I have nowhere else to go." I stood perfectly still under the protective cover of the glass awning. I did not invite him inside. I did not offer him a towel or a warm cup of coffee. I simply looked right at him with a solid expression of absolute clinical detachment and sheer indifference. "State your business, Richard," I said, my voice flat and devoid of any familial warmth. My father let out a ragged, desperate sob. Genuine, pathetic tears mixed heavily with the freezing rain falling rapidly down his weathered face. "The banks are taking everything," he cried, his voice cracking with profound panic. "The bankruptcy trustees froze all my personal accounts. They are seizing the family estate tomorrow morning. I am going to lose the house, Sienna, the house you grew up in. They are taking my cars, my investments, my entire pension. I have absolutely nothing left. Trent is completely useless and his wife is threatening to leave him. I am entirely alone." He slowly dropped to his shaking knees, right there on the wet, freezing concrete. The powerful corporate tyrant was kneeling in the freezing puddles, sobbing uncontrollably. "Please," he begged, looking up at me with wild, terrified eyes. "I just need a loan, a personal loan to pay off the immediate creditors and save the house. You have millions now. You can easily afford it. I will pay you back every single penny, I swear to God. I have learned my lesson, Sienna. I see how wrong I was. I see how horribly I treated you all those years. I was blinded by the business and by your brother. But you are my favorite daughter. You have always been my favorite daughter. You are brilliant and successful, and you are the only one who can save me from this nightmare." He reached out, trying to grab the hem of my expensive suit pants. I took a single deliberate step backward, ensuring his wet hands grasped nothing but empty air. He stared up at me, his face twisted in absolute agonizing desperation, expecting to see a flicker of sympathy or a sudden rush of daughterly devotion. He genuinely believed that his tears and his desperate groveling would somehow erase 33 years of systematic emotional abuse. I looked down at the kneeling, shivering man. I did not flinch. I did not offer a shoulder to cry on. I did not feel a single ounce of pity for the architect of my former misery. I maintained an absolute cold boundary, standing perfectly firm and unshakable as the Seattle rain continued to pour down around us. I stared down at the trembling figure of my father as the freezing rain continued to batter his ruined custom suit. He remained on his knees on the wet concrete, looking up at me with an expression of profound, agonizing desperation. He was waiting for a lifeline. He was waiting for the obedient daughter he had bullied and belittled for 33 years to suddenly reappear and sacrifice her own hard-earned success to shield him from the consequences of his extreme arrogance. He expected me to write a multi-million-dollar check simply because we shared the same last name. He wanted me to buy back the exact same toxic family dynamic that nearly destroyed my professional potential. I felt the crisp, cool air brush against my face under the heavy glass awning. My heart beat with a steady, calm rhythm. I felt absolutely no obligation to save him from the financial execution he had aggressively orchestrated for himself. I looked at Richard Caldwell and spoke with a voice that carried the absolute finality of a closing door. "I already paid for my share of this family at that restaurant," I stated, my words slicing through the heavy sound of the torrential downpour. "When you forced me to pay that $4,000 dinner bill to celebrate my brother stealing my credit, you demanded it as rent for the years you raised me." "I paid the bill in full, Richard. The transaction is completely finalized. We are entirely even. There is absolutely nothing left for me to give you, and there is nothing left for you to take." My father let out a hollow, devastated gasp. His hands dropped to his sides, splashing into the icy puddles gathering on the pavement. He finally realized that the emotional manipulation he had weaponized his entire life was completely useless against me. The absolute finality of my statement stripped away the last remaining shreds of his delusional hope. I did not wait for him to formulate another pathetic excuse or offer another empty apology. I turned my back on him with deliberate mechanical precision. I raised my hand, giving a sharp, brief nod to the private security guards standing by the lobby doors. The guards immediately stepped forward out of the shadows, moving to intercept my father and escort him permanently off the luxury property premises. At that exact moment, a sleek black stretch limousine glided smoothly under the illuminated glass awning, pulling up right next to the curb. The rear passenger door swung open to reveal the warm, luxurious interior. Dominic Reed sat in the plush leather seating, wearing an immaculate tailored tuxedo. He held a crystal glass of sparkling water, projecting the relaxed, triumphant energy of a chief executive officer who had just dominated the global market. He smiled warmly, extending a hand to assist me into the vehicle. I stepped inside the spacious cabin, leaving the cold Seattle storm entirely behind me. The heavy car door shut with a solid, resonant thud, instantly blocking out the sound of the rain and the sight of the broken man kneeling on the concrete. I settled into the luxurious leather seat, smoothing the fabric of my own designer evening gown. We were heading to the Grand Ballroom downtown to celebrate the most profitable quarter in the entire corporate history of Apex Global. Dominic raised his crystal glass in a silent, respectful toast. "Everything handled," he asked, his tone reflecting genuine professional courtesy. I looked out the tinted window, watching the Azure Tower recede into the distance as our driver navigated the slick city streets. Everything is completely handled, I replied, feeling a profound wave of total liberation wash over my entire being. The past is officially closed. Dominic nodded, his eyes gleaming with aggressive corporate ambition. Then let us focus entirely on the future, Sienna. The board of directors is absolutely thrilled with the new routing integration. Your proprietary algorithm just secured 3 massive international shipping contracts this afternoon alone. We are officially dominating the global logistics sector. I smiled, leaning back against the comfortable leather upholstery. The financial numbers were staggering, but the true victory was the unshakable absolute autonomy I had finally achieved. I was no longer a hidden asset locked away in a glass-walled back office. I was the supreme architect of an international technological empire. The limousine pulled up to the grand entrance of the luxury hotel hosting the Apex Global Corporate Gala. Brilliant flashes of light illuminated the night sky as industry photographers documented the arrival of the executive team. I stepped out of the vehicle onto the plush red carpet, feeling the vibrant electric energy of a room filled with people who genuinely respected my immense intellectual contributions. I walked through the grand double doors surrounded by peers who valued my operational brilliance over outdated toxic family loyalty. I took a deep breath, absorbing the magnificent atmosphere of pure, unadulterated success. My journey from a blatantly disrespected data analyst to a highly compensated corporate titan was a brutal, grueling battle. I had endured years of aggressive gaslighting, intense financial manipulation, and profound emotional neglect from the very people who were supposed to protect my best interests. But the grueling fire of their constant disrespect had ultimately forged my absolute, unshakable resilience. I had weaponized their arrogance and turned it into the precise instrument of my own ultimate liberation. As I walked toward the main ballroom, ready to take my rightful place at the absolute head of the executive table, I allowed myself one final reflection on the spectacular burning wreckage of Caldwell Logistics. The ultimate lesson of my entire corporate ascension was incredibly simple and brutally absolute. Never shrink yourself to fit at a table that does not respect you. Build your own table and buy the room. The most profound lesson embedded within these narratives is that your inherent value is never dictated by the people who are too broken or self-absorbed to recognize it. Often we are conditioned to believe that our biological family is the ultimate arbiter of our worth. We exhaust ourselves seeking validation from parents or siblings who constantly move the goalposts, prioritizing their golden children, their wealth, or their social image over our well-being. However, as these journeys demonstrate, staying at a table where you are continuously served disrespect only starves your potential. The turning point in reclaiming your life is the realization that blood does not automatically equate to unconditional love or loyalty. True family is defined by the people who show up for you during your darkest moments, who celebrate your quiet victories without jealousy, and who respect the boundaries you set for your own peace. When you stop shrinking yourself to fit into a toxic, pre-written family narrative, you finally free up the energy to build your own empire. Whether that empire is a thriving business, a peaceful home, or simply a life lived authentically on your own terms, it is built on the unwavering foundation of self-respect. Furthermore, healing does not require you to reconcile with those who continually hurt you. Walking away from deeply ingrained toxicity is not an act of cruelty or selfishness. It is the ultimate act of self-preservation and personal justice. You owe nothing to those who only value you when it is convenient for their own agendas. If you are currently compromising your peace for people who only offer you conditional love, take the first step today to establish your boundaries and start building a table of your own.